What if the most expensive part of visiting New York is not the hotel, the flight, or the famous attractions, but the money you lose without ever realizing it? This city is sold as a symbol of freedom, success, and possibility. Yet the moment you arrive, a different reality quietly takes control. New York does not ask you to spend, it conditions you to spend. And it does this so subtly that most visitors leave believing it was all their own choice. Think about the first emotion the city provokes. Excitement mixed with urgency. Everything moves fast, everyone seems busy, and the environment constantly pushes you forward. This is not accidental. The urban design, the noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation all work together to keep your brain in a state of alert. When your mind is overloaded, your ability to question small decisions disappears. That is where the real cost begins. Not in large purchases, but in dozens of micro-expenses that feel harmless in isolation. New York thrives on fragmentation. Prices are rarely final. There is always something added later. A fee, a charge, a tip, a tax, a convenience cost. None of them feel dramatic on their own. $5 here, $8 there. But the city is structured so these additions follow you everywhere. Transportation, food, lodging, even basic services. You stop calculating because calculation becomes exhausting. And exhaustion is profitable. This is where the illusion of choice collapses. You are not spending because you want to. You are spending because the system removes your ability to pause. The city teaches you that stopping is dangerous. Missing a train, holding up a line, questioning a charge feels socially unacceptable. So you comply. You tap your card, you move on, you tell yourself it is normal, everyone does it. That is how New York rewires behavior without force. Movies and media never show this side. They show skyline shots, yellow cabs, rooftop drinks, and smiling crowds. What they hide is the psychological pressure that turns visitors into passive participants in an extraction model. The city does not need to scam you openly. It simply overwhelms you until resistance feels pointless. And the most effective systems are always the ones that feel invisible. What makes this darker is that tourists often accept this as part of the experience. They believe stress equals authenticity. That discomfort is the price of being somewhere important. But importance is exactly what the city uses to justify its excesses. You are told you are lucky to be here, and luck in this context becomes an excuse for exploitation. By the time you start noticing something is wrong, the trip is already halfway over. The charges have accumulated, the fatigue has set in, and the city keeps moving, indifferent to whether you are enjoying it or not. This is not about one bad experience or one unfair bill. It is about a system designed to drain quietly, efficiently, and continuously, while convincing you that this is simply how a global city works, and this is only the surface. Because once you look closer at where these charges appear, how they repeat, and why they are never clearly explained, a much more deliberate structure starts to emerge. If this already feels familiar, it is not by accident. Understanding how these systems work is the first step to seeing cities like New York for what they really are, beyond the marketing and the myths. This kind of analysis only makes sense when people stop consuming passively and start questioning what they experience. That is why your participation matters here. If you have ever visited New York or any major city and felt that constant pressure to spend without fully realizing where your money was going, leave a comment sharing what caught you off guard the most. Even a short phrase like, "It felt exhausting," or "Everything had an extra charge," helps expose how widespread this experience really is. If this perspective is helping you see urban life differently, leave a like so this video reaches more people who are still trapped inside the illusion. And if you want more content that breaks down the hidden mechanics of modern cities, subscribe to the channel. This is not about entertainment. It is about understanding the systems shaping daily life. Once you start paying attention, you realize New York rarely presents a full price. What it presents is an invitation, and the real cost arrives later, broken into pieces small enough to avoid resistance. This is not accidental. It is a carefully normalized system where charges are separated from the moment of decision, so your brain never experiences the full impact at once. Take something as simple as moving through the city. The base fare is never the final fare. There are surcharges, peak pricing, service fees, and temporary adjustments that somehow never disappear. Each one is framed as reasonable, even necessary. You are told it keeps the system running. You are told it is standard. And because everyone around you accepts it without question, you do the same. Social proof replaces transparency. The same logic applies everywhere else. Restaurants list prices that exclude mandatory tips, local taxes, and added service charges. Hotels advertise nightly rates that hide resort fees, city occupancy taxes, and facility charges revealed only at checkout. Attractions sell tickets that suddenly require add-ons to function properly. Lockers, fast, lanes, processing fees. The city does not sell experiences. It sells fragments that reassemble into a much higher total once it is too late to opt out. What makes this especially effective is timing. These charges appear when you are already committed. You have already eaten the meal. You have already slept in the room. You have already entered the attraction. At that point, questioning the price feels useless. The transaction is over. The city counts on this moment of resignation. It is not theft. It is design. Psychologically, this creates a dangerous feedback loop. You stop tracking expenses because tracking becomes overwhelming. Instead of adding everything up, you rely on rough impressions. And New York is built to distort those impressions. Small numbers feel harmless, even when they repeat dozens of times a day. The city drains through repetition, not shock. This fragmentation also protects the city's image. There is no single outrageous price to criticize. No headline, grabbing number. Just 1,000 tiny extractions that never quite justify outrage on their own. When visitors complain, they sound petty. When residents complain, they sound bitter. The system survives because it hides behind complexity. Over time, this constant low-level financial pressure changes behavior. People rush decisions. They avoid resting. They skip reflection. They adapt to spending as if it were background noise. And that is the most alarming part. When paying more becomes invisible, resistance disappears entirely. The city no longer needs to convince you. It only needs to keep you moving. This is why New York feels expensive in a way that is hard to explain afterward. You struggle to point to one moment, one charge, one clear injustice. Instead, you leave with a vague sense of depletion, not just in your wallet, but in your energy. And that feeling is not accidental. It is the byproduct of a system perfected to extract without confrontation. And this logic does not start in restaurants or hotels. It begins the moment you arrive, in the very place that is supposed to welcome you. The illusion begins to crack the moment you land. Airports are not neutral spaces. They are stress amplifiers. And in New York, they function as the first stage of financial conditioning. You arrive tired, disoriented, eager to move forward, and that state is immediately exploited. Prices are higher, information is fragmented, and every option seems designed to remove friction by charging you for speed, clarity, or comfort. Food is the most obvious signal. Basic meals cost double what they would elsewhere, often for lower quality. Bottled water feels absurdly priced, yet the environment makes refusal uncomfortable. Long lines, limited seating, constant announcements. The message is subtle but clear. Pay and move on or stay uncomfortable. Most people choose movement, and movement always has a cost. Transportation inside the airport reinforces the same logic. Clear. Signage is rare where cheaper options exist. Premium services are highlighted. Taxis, ride shares, express options dominate the visual field. Public transport feels hidden, complicated, or intimidating to someone unfamiliar. By the time you realize there was a cheaper alternative, you're already in the car, watching the meter climb while telling yourself it is just the price of convenience. Even time itself becomes monetized. Delays turn into opportunities to spend. Lounges sell relief from noise and crowds. Fast-track security sells peace of mind. Charging stations sit beside overpriced cafes. The longer you wait, the more the environment nudges you toward consumption. You are not bored. You are being softened. What makes airports especially revealing is how openly this behavior is accepted. No one expects fairness there. Visitors treat it as a temporary anomaly, a necessary inconvenience. But this mindset is exactly what prepares you for the rest of the city. The airport trains you to accept inflated prices, unclear fees, and psychological pressure as normal. It lowers your resistance before you even reach the streets. And New York's airports carry an additional layer of decay: outdated infrastructure, overcrowded terminals, understaffed services. You are paying more while receiving less, yet the narrative insists you are lucky just to be there. This contradiction sets the tone for everything that follows. High cost does not guarantee quality. It guarantees access to a system that no longer prioritizes the human experience. This is where many visitors feel their first wave of unease. Not panic, not anger, but a quiet realization that something feels off. The city they imagined was supposed to impress immediately. Instead, it overwhelms, rushes, and extracts. And because this happens before you have even reached your hotel, your baseline expectations shift downward without you noticing. By the time you step outside into the city, your standards have already been adjusted. You are more tolerant of chaos, more willing to overpay, less likely to question what feels wrong. The airport has done its job. It has introduced you to the rules of the game. Where many visitors believe they are finally resting, the extraction quietly accelerates. Hotels in New York are not just places to sleep. They are financial filters designed to separate advertised prices from real costs, while making the process feel routine enough that few people stop to question it. The Azai nightly rate you saw online was never the truth. It was an entry point. The moment you check in, the language shifts. Resort fees, destination fees, facility fees, urban fees. Different names, same function. Charges that supposedly cover amenities you may never use, services you did not request, experiences you did not consent to. Wi-Fi, gym access, towels, business centers. The fees are framed as standard, non-negotiable, and unavoidable. And because you are tired, carrying luggage, and surrounded by people waiting behind you, resistance feels socially inappropriate. This is not accidental psychology. The front desk is designed to discourage friction. Questions slow the line. Complaints feel embarrassing. The system relies on your desire to appear reasonable. So you sign, you nod, you tell yourself it will not matter in the long run. That is how acceptance is manufactured. Even budget accommodations adopt the same logic. Lower quality does not mean lower complexity. Cheaper. Hotels often compensate with additional rules, deposits, service charges, and surprise add-ons. Late checkout fees, luggage storage fees, early arrival penalties. Suddenly, the promise of affordability dissolves into a maze of conditions that punish flexibility. The city monetizes your lack of local knowledge. What makes this especially effective is how normalized it feels. Many visitors have already experienced similar tactics elsewhere, so they assume this is simply how travel works now. But New York pushes this model further. The fees are higher, the explanations vaguer, and the gap between expectation and reality wider. Yet the city's reputation shields it from scrutiny. People expect to pay more because it is New York. That expectation becomes a shield against criticism. Psychologically, this creates a strange contradiction. You are paying premium prices, yet the experience rarely feels premium. Rooms are small, noise is constant, maintenance feels rushed, staff are stretched, thin. You are charged for comfort while adapting to discomfort. Over time, this erodes trust, but the trip continues because walking away feels impossible. You are already committed. This is where many visitors begin to feel trapped in micro-compromises. You lower your standards to reduce stress. You accept less space, less quiet, less care, because pushing back costs energy you no longer have. And that energy, just like money, becomes a limited resource the city steadily drains. Hotels are not an isolated problem. They are a concentrated version of the city's broader logic: promise simplicity, deliver complexity, advertise clarity, enforce opacity. By the time you leave your room each morning, you are already mentally prepared to accept the same treatment everywhere else. Transportation in New York is often described as iconic, efficient, even liberating. But for many visitors, it becomes one of the most quietly draining parts of the experience. Not because it is unusable, but because it demands constant attention, constant adaptation, and constant spending while offering very little sense of control. The metro, buses, rideshares, and taxis form a system that looks functional on the surface, but operates in a state of permanent friction. The subway is the clearest example. Fares appear simple until they are not. Peak pricing, service disruptions, delayed lines, reroutes, maintenance shutdowns. What should be predictable becomes a daily puzzle. Visitors stand in stations staring at maps that do not reflect reality in real time, trying to interpret announcements they barely understand. When confusion sets in, convenience becomes tempting. Ride shares fill that gap instantly, at a much higher cost. This is where the psychological drain begins. Every movement requires a decision. Which line is running? Which exit is closest? Whether the station is safe at night? Whether the train will arrive on time? These micro-decisions accumulate. By the end of the day, mental fatigue replaces curiosity. And fatigue makes expensive options feel reasonable. Paying more feels like buying relief. Taxis and ride shares reinforce this dynamic. Surge pricing appears without warning. Traffic turns short trips into long, expensive waits. Routes feel opaque, especially to visitors unfamiliar with the city's geography. You watch the meter climb while telling yourself there is no alternative. That sense of inevitability is powerful. It turns frustration into acceptance. What is rarely discussed is how transportation costs extend beyond money. They shape how long you stay out, where you go, and how much energy you have left to enjoy anything. People skip neighborhoods they wanted to see. They leave earlier than planned. They compress experiences into shorter windows. The city becomes smaller, not because it lacks offerings, but because reaching them feels exhausting. Over time, this constant friction creates a subtle emotional shift. Movement stops, feeling exploratory, and starts feeling transactional. You are not navigating a city. You are negotiating with it. And every negotiation has a cost. When a city demands payment just to move without stress, it is no longer serving its people. It is extracting from them. This model also affects residents, but visitors experience it more intensely because they lack routines. Locals adapt by memorizing patterns, avoiding certain hours, accepting discomfort. Visitors cannot. They absorb the full force of the system all at once. And because the city never slows down, neither can they. By the end of a few days, many people feel a strange contradiction. They have seen famous places, taken photos, checked boxes, yet they feel worn down, not energized. Transportation played a major role in that shift. It quietly reshaped the trip into a sequence of endurance tests. Food in New York is marketed as an experience, a cultural symbol, proof that the city offers something for everyone. But once you are inside that system, eating stops being nourishment and starts becoming one of the most efficient extraction tools the city has. Not because the food is bad, but because the entire structure around it is designed to multiply costs while making them feel unavoidable. Menus rarely tell the full story. Listed prices exclude tax. They exclude tips that are no longer optional but socially enforced. They exclude service charges quietly added at the end. What looks affordable on paper becomes noticeably heavier once the bill arrives. And this happens repeatedly, several times a day. Breakfast, coffee, lunch, snacks, dinner. Each meal becomes a small financial surrender. The pressure is psychological as much as economic. Restaurants are crowded, loud, and fast-paced. Tables turn quickly. Staff are stretched thin. You feel rushed to order, rushed to eat, rushed to leave. That environment discourages reflection. You do not pause to ask whether something is worth the price. You simply accept it. Hunger combined with urgency is a powerful persuader. Even casual food follows the same logic. Street vendors, food trucks, quick service counters, portions shrink, prices climb, and add-ons appear everywhere. Extra sauces, substitutions, packaging fees. None of them feel significant alone. Together, they quietly inflate the cost of simply staying functional in the city. What makes this especially draining is frequency. Unlike attractions or hotels, food is unavoidable. You cannot skip it without paying a physical price. And when healthy, affordable options are scarce or inconvenient, you are pushed toward whatever is fastest and closest. Convenience replaces choice. The city profits from your biological needs. There is also a social dimension that rarely gets discussed. Tipping culture in New York is no longer about reward, it is about obligation. Visitors feel anxiety around under-tipping, unsure of local expectations. That anxiety becomes another silent cost. You bother tip to avoid discomfort. You comply to avoid judgment. The city extracts through social pressure, not force. Over several days, this creates a strange emotional pattern. Meals stop feeling enjoyable. They become calculations. You eat not for pleasure, but to maintain energy. And every time the bill arrives, there is a small sense of irritation mixed with resignation. You tell yourself it is temporary. You tell yourself it is worth it. But the body keeps score. This is one of the clearest examples of how New York converts daily life into a revenue stream. Eating should ground you. Instead, it becomes another reminder that nothing here is neutral. Everything costs more than it appears. Everything demands attention. Everything takes something from you. By the time fatigue sets in, the city changes tactics. When people are tired, overloaded, and slightly irritated, they become easier to push. This is where New York's commercial environment reveals one of its most calculated layers. Shopping and convenience are no longer about desire, they are about relief. And relief in this city is always monetized. Stores are placed exactly where exhaustion peaks, near transit exits, between long walks, beside crowded attractions. Bright lights, aggressive signage, promises of quick solutions. Water, snacks, chargers, souvenirs, last-minute essentials. Everything is positioned to catch you at the moment your resistance is lowest. You are not shopping because you want to. You are shopping because stopping feels easier than continuing without help. What is rarely acknowledged is how pricing adapts to this moment. Convenience stores charge premium prices for basic items because they know you will not search for alternatives. Pharmacies sell essentials at inflated rates because they are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Souvenir shops package low-quality items as emotional proof that the trip mattered. Fatigue turns objects into justification. You buy to validate the experience. Experiences follow the same logic. Skip the line passes, express access, upgrades, shortcuts. Each one promises to save time or energy, yet each one reinforces the same system that created the exhaustion in the first place. The city manufactures friction, then sells temporary relief from it. That cycle repeats constantly. Psychologically, this is where many visitors lose awareness of their spending entirely. Small purchases feel inconsequential compared to earlier costs. 10. Dollars no longer registers as real money. 20 feels minor. The scale shifts. And once scale shifts, discipline disappears. The city does not need to pressure you anymore. You pressure yourself. This environment also reshapes memory. People remember the skyline, the photos, the moments of excitement. They forget the dozens of times they paid simply to feel less uncomfortable. But those moments add up, not just financially, but emotionally. They turn the trip into a series of transactions, instead of experiences. What makes this especially unsettling is how normalized it feels. No one calls it manipulation. It is framed as urban efficiency. Fast access, constant availability. But availability without fairness becomes exploitation. And when exhaustion becomes the entry point for spending, the city is no longer serving people. It is harvesting them. At some point, something subtle happens. The shock fades, the irritation softens, and what once felt absurd starts to feel normal. This is the most dangerous phase of the experience because normalization is where the system becomes invisible. Charges that would have triggered anger on day 1 barely register by day 4. The city has not changed. You have adapted. This adaptation is not a personal failure. It is a predictable psychological response to constant pressure. When everything costs more, when every interaction includes a small financial demand, the brain stops reacting to protect itself. Awareness is replaced by resignation. You stop asking why. You stop comparing prices. You stop expecting clarity. That silence is exactly what the system needs to survive. You hear people say things like, "This is just how New York works," or "Every big city is like this now." Those phrases are not explanations. They are coping mechanisms. They allow the mind to close the loop without confronting the discomfort of being exploited. Once something is framed as inevitable, resistance feels childish. Complaining feels pointless. Acceptance becomes the path of least resistance. This normalization spreads socially. Visitors reassure each other. Locals minimize concerns. Media narratives reinforce the idea that high cost equals high value. Over time, the abuse loses its name. It becomes background noise. And background noise is powerful because it shapes behavior without triggering alarm. The city benefits from this quiet agreement. There are no protests against small fees, no outrage over incremental increases, no collective memory of how things used to be. Each charge arrives in isolation, detached from history. Without comparison, there is no sense of loss. Without loss, there is no demand for change. What is most unsettling is how quickly this mindset transfers beyond the trip. People return home more tolerant of similar tactics. Extra charges feel less offensive. Convenience fees feel more acceptable. The city does not just extract money, it exports lowered expectations. That is how a model spreads without enforcement. This is where New York stops being just a destination and becomes a training ground. It teaches people how to live inside systems that demand more while giving less. It teaches endurance over objection, adaptation over accountability. And once those lessons settle in, they are hard to unlearn. What allows this system to continue is not just design or psychology, but silence. A collective silence that protects the image of the city while isolating individual frustration. People experience the same pressures, the same hidden charges, the same exhaustion, yet rarely speak about it openly. When they do, it is often framed as personal failure rather than structural design. Tourism marketing plays a central role here. The dominant narrative celebrates resilience, hustle, intensity. If you struggle, the implication is that you were not prepared enough, not savvy enough, not tough enough. This reframing shifts responsibility away from the city and onto the individual. Discomfort becomes a rite of passage. Exploitation becomes proof of authenticity. Media reinforces this pattern. Articles focus on record tourism numbers, iconic experiences, must-see attractions. They rarely examine the human cost of navigating the city as a temporary outsider. When costs are mentioned, they are abstract. High prices are treated as trivia, not as pressure. The daily accumulation of small charges never becomes a story because it lacks spectacle. And without spectacle, there is no accountability. Institutions benefit from this quiet arrangement. Fragmented fees mean fragmented responsibility. No single actor appears at fault. Airlines blame airports. Hotels blame city regulations. Restaurants blame labor costs. Transit systems blame maintenance. Each piece points elsewhere, and the visitor is left holding the total without a clear target for frustration. This silence also protects the identity of New York itself. Admitting systemic exploitation would challenge the idea that the city represents opportunity and progress. It would force uncomfortable questions about who the city is actually built for. So the narrative remains intact. Complaints are dismissed as exaggeration. Normalization fills the gap where debate should exist. What makes this especially effective is that visitors often internalize the experience. They feel drained but cannot articulate why. They know they spent more than expected but struggle to pinpoint how. That vagueness prevents collective recognition, and without recognition, systems remain untouched. Over time, this silence becomes cultural. People joke about the expense. They warn others casually, but they rarely analyze it deeply. The result is a city that continues to extract quietly, protected by its own mythology and by the reluctance of people to challenge something so widely admired. This is the point where the trip stops being just a visit and starts turning into a warning. Because what New York reveals is not an isolated excess, but a model. A city that no longer needs to shock or impress, only to normalize extraction so thoroughly that people adapt without resistance. The danger is not that New York is expensive. The danger is that it teaches you to accept being drained as the price of participation. When a city reaches this stage, collapse does not arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrives quietly, through erosion. People stop expecting fairness. They stop demanding transparency. They plan their behavior around avoidance rather than enjoyment. The city becomes something to endure, not to inhabit. And for visitors, that shift is easier to notice because it happens fast. What makes New York especially significant is its symbolic power. It has long represented ambition, freedom, and upward movement. When that symbol starts operating as a machine of pressure and depletion, the implications go far beyond tourism. It signals what happens when cities prioritize image over livability, revenue over humanity, movement over meaning. Many visitors leave New York with mixed emotions they struggle to name. Pride for having experienced it, relief to be leaving, fatigue that lingers longer than expected, and beneath all of that, a quiet realization that something fundamental is broken, not in one place, but in the way modern cities increasingly function. This is why the charges matter, not because of the money itself, but because they reveal intent. A city that hides costs is a city that no longer trusts people. A city that fragments responsibility is a city that avoids accountability. And a city that conditions acceptance through exhaustion is not building culture, it is managing compliance. New York did not become this way overnight, and it will not change quickly. But it does offer clarity. It shows what happens when urban life is optimized for extraction rather than belonging. When every moment is monetized and every inconvenience is turned into an upsell, the city stops being a place and becomes a process. If this made you rethink not just New York, but other major cities as well, leave a comment with a phrase like, "This is spreading," or "Not just New York." Those words capture the larger pattern at work. If you stayed until the end of this video, it means this message resonated with you on a deeper level. That alone already sets you apart from most people who consume content without reflection. Cities like New York only keep operating this way because too few people stop to question what feels normal. Understanding these systems is not about travel tips. It is about protecting your time, your energy, and your expectations. If this video helped you see urban life more clearly, subscribe to the channel now. This space exists to break illusions, not to sell them. Leave a like if you believe more people need to hear this perspective, because the algorithm only pushes content that people actively support. And most importantly, leave a comment. Write, "I see the illusion now," or "The cost is invisible," so this discussion stays alive and visible to others who feel the same discomfort but cannot yet put it into words. Your comment helps turn individual frustration into collective awareness. Now watch the next video appearing on your screen. It connects directly to what you just heard and goes even deeper into how modern cities quietly reshape behavior, expectations, and freedom.